All right. We are going to talk about a very interesting topic today. And this topic has
All
to
right.
do with the people behind Epstein. And I think it's important for us to understand what's going on here. So let's first of all, let's try to understand what is it that we know versus what we don't know. But more importantly, we have been focusing on the institution. And we are going to be talking about Epstein CPA and Epstein lawyer. Two men who hold all the secrets. So we're gonna dive in one of the most important and least understood pieces of the Epstein story. Because so far we've been talking about the island, we have been talking about the flight logs, we've been talking about the celebrities, the people that were there, that were not there. But at the end of the day, Epstein didn't do this on his own. He had help. He had help from institutions. And at the end of the day, these things are going to come out more and more. The CPA and the lawyer who served Jeffrey Epstein and controlled his fortunes and secrets. And that is what it is that we're going to be talking about because it is becoming a very important topic. So there was his lawyer, okay? So first of all, tonight, we're going to be diving into one of the most important and least understood pieces of the Epstein story. Not the island, not the flight logs, not the celebrities, but the two men who managed Jeffrey Epstein's money, controlled his corporate empire, protected his secrecy, and hold more answers than anyone else alive. And yet, and I will explain to you why, nothing has happened to them. Nothing at all. Let's find out. Let's find out what is going on. So, who are they? What they control? Why they were never charged? Why they were never charged? Because now, as we say more and more, this Epstein situation has to do with the institutions, or at least the people that represent those institutions. For example, Larry Summers recently he was everywhere and now he's nowhere. Why? Is he going to jail? No. All of the institutions that supported him have just vanished away. They don't want anything having to do with him. Larry Summers was basically, he at one point he was he was at Harvard. He was a professor. He was asked to leave. He was an advisor. He was an OpenAI. He was everywhere, and now he's nowhere. Why? Because some email that came out 2 weeks ago, and no one wants to know about him anymore. And this is exemplary of what's going to happen next. All of these institutions, because remember, they don't want to be trialed. Institutions don't have to be trialed. The fact that your name gets associated with Epstein is a huge problem for them. And therefore, they will pay or go away. So who are these two men? Well, basically, first of all, you have his personal attorney. He was this personal attorney for decades. Not an occasional lawyer. He was his primary lawyer. He handled Epstein's wills, Epstein's trust, his offshore corporate structures, real estate and property transfers, corporate filings, settlement contracts, confidential agreements. When he needed something finalized and done, he went to his lawyer. But he wasn't just a lawyer. He was the legal architect of Epstein's entire empire. He knew where everything was, and this is what's amazing. He knew how everything was structured, and he knew who was being paid and why. Then, of course, you have his personal accountant, his CPA, and financial manager. And what did he do? Well, basically, he controlled the flow of the money between dozens of shell companies. tax filings, offshore accounts, banking relationships. Don't forget, some of these banks did business with Epstein long after he was indicted in 2008. They were tracking his income, his payout, his transfers, charitable foundations. They form the operational core of Epstein's financial life. What did they control? Well, his money didn't sit in a checking account, right? He had offshore trusts, shell corporations, private foundations, charitable fronts, LLC with no physical address, investments held through proxies, accounts in the US and multiple foreign jurisdictions. Right? So the system, this was not something that he dreamed up and he said, well, let's do it. There was a structure. There was a context. There were people that he relied on to keep it going. And of course, as Ghislaine Maxwell said, I don't know what was going on. It was built by lawyers and accountants to maximize secrecy. Epstein lawyer and CPA didn't just handle paperwork, they created and maintained a structure designed to prevent scrutiny. Okay? And at the end of the day, what you're seeing is a lot of issues that you think that you could understand, but they're not that simple. That's because the two men who would know built a system that kept the money untraceable. They control the books, the assets, the trust, the funding, the tax vehicles, the non-profit fronts, and even after he died, the final will signed just 48 hours before his death. Name only those two men as executors. It's interesting. And this is where the real questions are going to begin. And of course, we are going to be talking more and more about all these things. Why? Because now people want to know. And they have access to everything. If you want to understand why these two men matter, here's a simple truth. They know everything. Right? Who paid Epstein? Who Epstein paid? Which institution took Epstein's donation? Which banks ignored the warnings? There was a lot of them. Which charities funneled his money? Which politicians accepted contribution? Which universities kept accepting millions after his 2008 conviction? Which friends funded foundation with him? Which hedge funds or billionaires used him as middlemen? They were the record keepers of Epstein elite facing life. So if Epstein was to face were the machine behind the curtain, his lawyer and his CPA, his accountant. So I guess the question is, well, why were they never charged? This is the part that is very shocking, right? These two men managed Epstein's finances, structured his operations, control his assets, set up his corporate architecture, and maintain his secrecy, yet they were never charged. Sad. Well, the same way, we don't see too many institutions being indicted apart from Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell and everybody else didn't do anything. No indictments, no trials, not even a formal accusation. Why is that? Well, the reason is the ignorance defense shield. Legally, lawyers and accountants can claim, I didn't know my clients were committing crimes. I didn't know any of it. Remember when Bernie Madoff got caught with a $50 billion worth of Ponzi scheme. They went to his son and his wife, and they said, and you didn't know anything that was going on? They didn't. But in this case, these people are clearly involved. I mean, the prosecutors would have to show a memo, an email, a witness, an explicit instruction that proves they knew about the trafficking. The prosecutors can't touch them. This shield is how many white-collar networks protect the inner circle. Reason number 2, the government needed them. The government needed them. After Epstein died, the government faced a massive problem. Epstein's financial empire was a maze. I don't know what's going on. Only 2 people understood it, the lawyer and the CPA. They knew where the records were, where the accounts were, where the offshore structures were, and who had been paid and when. So charging them would immediately shut down all cooperation. So instead of prosecuting them, authorities effectively said, help us unwind this. Now remember, all the information, those emails that came out, the Christmas cards and all that, where does you think that comes from? That comes from these 2 guys because they hold the Epstein trust. Everything is there. They need them. They became indispensable. Are they untouchable? That's going to be the question. A trial would have blown up they would have blown up major institutions. If those lawyers and if that lawyer and that CPA were charged, they would be entitled to subpoenas, discovery, cross-examination, the right to defend themselves by exposing others. That is probably why the reason you haven't heard from them, because they don't want to have to hear what they have to say. They could argue, we weren't alone. The banks knew, the universities knew, the foundations knew, the politicians knew, everyone knew. It would drag in JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Harvard. I mean, so far we've seen Deutsche Bank. JP Morgan has paid a few dollars, and they may be brought on Congress. Harvard, we know the story about that. MIT, hedge funds, billionaires, global institution. A trial would have turned the Epstein story from a predator case into a systemic, institutional corruption case. Exactly what is going on right now with the House of Windsor. Prince Charles, basically would have prostitutes come to the palace and no one knew about it. He had people come over, visit the palace, and he would charge them $1 million. No one knew about it. It is hard to fathom that no one was aware of it. Again, another institution that is being protected. Their silence protected powerful people. If he speaks, an institution falls. Reputations are going to collapse. Charging them would force them to defend themselves. They did not want to hear the defense argument. Reason number 5, what this means about the institutions that enable Epstein, this is where the story expands. Epstein was not a lone actor. He operated inside a web of institutional failure and cooperation. The lawyer and the accountant symbolize that system. What can lawyers do? Lawyers can enable abuse when they build secrecy structures. Basically, he created trusts, foundations, corporate shells, NDAs, system meant to shield Epstein and his money. Good lawyers know how to protect their clients. That's exactly what he did. Now, against what? Accountant can mask payment and move money quietly. He managed the offshore accounts, the tax havens, the financial flows, the charity fronts. These are all institutions. It's not just him and a couple of girls. No. It's him. Huge amount of institutions around him. And his hands were all over. And he knew that they knew that he knew. That's why everybody kept quiet. Banks allowed financial institutions, right, to continue. Banks process suspicious wire transfers. They process large cash withdrawals. They oversee transfers, payment to young women. JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank flagged the concerns but kept the account open because Epstein brought wealthy clients. They say, listen, there's something going on and we should be worried about it, but we really can't shut the door either. Because we don't know, we assume. Universities and science institutions accepted his money. Harvard, MIT, Stanford programs, the Santa Fe Institute, and other research hubs accepted his donations. Why? Because he connected them to billionaires. He was everywhere. Prestige over ethics. Charities and non-profit use Epstein's donations. Politician took his contribution from both parties for years. Right? This idea that is just one monster is for the people, the regular people like yourselves. So you say, well, let's go after him. When he's dead, so it's over. It's not, people. It's not. Epstein was a lone predator operating in secret, but the truth is, Epstein existed because dozens of institutions allow him to. He was a node in a network, a connector, a gatekeeper for elites, a source of money, introduction, opportunities, and influence. And the lawyer and the accountant were not on the periphery. They were at the center. The two men saw the entire web, and yet, in 2025, interest in the Epstein files exploding again. They thought this was all over. They thought that, you know what? We're done, right? And don't forget, they got paid a lot of money, millions of money, the lawyers and the accountant. But now, it's back out all again. 30,000 new documents, visitors' logs, financial transfers, emails, journal entries, corporate filing. All of this is putting pressure on institutions that want the stories buried. Now their names are coming up again. Right? So now the names are the archivists, the map makers, the custodians. They want to know, why were you holding his money? Why did you enable him? Why? Why would you enable something like that to go on? Now, so what does this all mean? It means that the real Epstein story isn't just about the crimes committed. It's about the structure that protected him. Explaining Epstein would examine the lawyer and the CPA is like describing a crime without mentioning the gateway drivers, the planners, or the people who provided the tools. They weren't bystanders. They weren't central operators. They were one that kept it going. The institutions that enable Epstein still have far more to lose than they have ever admitted. But as the pressure grows, as new documents emerge, and as more the public demands answer, and this is happening, especially now with the 218 votes, where they want to know and they want to see everything, not so much to put people in jail, but really to find out who enabled him. We see whether the walls finally crack, or whether the system will protect itself again. Either way, the story doesn't end with Epstein. It begins with the people who kept this world running and the institutions that allowed it to thrive. And that is where it becomes important. I mean, you have to understand that at this point, the votes in Congress that the Congress got and they're going to be releasing all of the financial statements. They're going to be releasing all of the files, all the logs. The only thing is, a lot of people are saying, yeah, but you know what? It's going to be unusable because a lot of it is going to be redacted anyway. Still, a lot of people, a lot of institutions do not want the inkling of anything having been done that is not good for them. Right? They don't want an inkling of any problem. So what they're going to do, they are going to protect themselves. The only thing is, it's very difficult to protect yourself for something that has already happened and on which your name is all over and on which, basically, were you doing business after 2008? Yes. Well, he was a pedophile in 2008. Why were you still doing business with him? Well, it's a mistake. We didn't know what he was doing. We just, okay, fine. How much is it going to cost us? And that is what you're going to see. The wall of secrecy is going to come down. Will it be allowed to come down? That's a problem. That's a question. Because it's quite possible that it's not allowed. We shall see.